so
I'll go back and just adjust it if I can.
so it's passed through.
Okay, welcome. Debate number 11. This is going to be great. My name is Bruce Gleason. I'm with Thumbs Up Video. I have to intro this even though I'm not the moderator because the internet speed happens to be really slow, and I apologize for the streaming audience. I sent out to about 1,500 people, free stream tonight, watch it. And now I'm going to say, please donate to backyardskeptics.com because you won't see that in any type of character generation or any description. So tonight we have free will. And in fact, I had some notes here that I know I'm going to mistake, forget something. Excuse me. Afterward, we're going to be going to eat somewhere. Is anybody interested in going and having a little bit of a late night bite? Anybody? Okay, well, if you change your mind, excuse me. And our next debate is going to be the historicity of Jesus. Well, and it's against John. And John, do you have another person coming with you?
Doug Hamp.
Okay, Doug. And it's going to be against Richard Carrier. Richard Carrier is one of the renowned biblical scholars, and he's taking the negative position of the history of Jesus. So it should be real interesting. It's going to be right here. And the last thing is, I'm really interested to talk about this, and I was kind of hesitant to bring up the subject of free will with today because it's been 2,300 years since humans have been talking about free will, and we're not even close to figuring it out. But what we will be close with in another 1,000 or 100 or 500 years, I think Dave mentioned maybe 500 years, fMRI machines might be able to actually diagnose one neuron firing in the future, and that will be interesting for free will. And of course, Sam Harris is talking about free will a lot. Now he's getting into spirituality, which is digressing a little bit, but his books on free will are very interesting. And tonight, I'm most interested in finding out the two different aspects of free will that I'm sure these guys are going to be talking about, and that is religious determinism or philosophical determinism. The difference being religious, claiming God as free will, or therefore we should have free will, or God gives us free will, and the other side is philosophical determinism, which is totally secular, makes no claims to the supernatural. So, our speakers today are Mike, the pastor of this church. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
And this is the first time for you here, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, be prepared to get beat up. Are you prepared?
I am.
Okay. Dave Lehman, everybody knows. And we have Jared and Wayne from Backyard Skeptics, the largest atheist organization in Orange County. You guys are going to have to share your mics. You got your waters? Okay, let's start. And before we start, I need to introduce Dave as the moderator. Dave, say hello.
Hello.
Whoa! Now, I'm going to get you. You're the Mike called pastor, so I'm going to be sound technician, cameraman, live streamer, so I'm multiple dimensions tonight. Do you have anything to say, Dave? You want to come up here and say it?
Sure.
Okay. Don't turn that off, just use these mics for now.
First, I want to go ahead and mention that our Toastmaster Club now meets here on the 2nd and the 4th Thursday of every month. We're not going to be meeting this Thursday because of the debate tonight, because of an area club contest, but encourage you, if you haven't ever attended a Toastmaster Club, consider us. I believe that we're going to use the format of letting the Backyard Skeptics have the first 10 minutes. 20 minutes will then go to the Toastmaster, the Christian side, and then the balance of that 10 minutes will go back to, for a total of 20 minutes before we open up to a discussion from you in attendance. And it's important that you consider the things that are said, consider asking questions as well. We'll have a reasonable amount of time allotted for discussion in the past, where there have been a large number of people in attendance. The line has been rather long, and so we didn't have time to allow for an interactive discussion in the past, but we believe we're going to be able to do that tonight, right?
Absolutely.
So if you all are comfortable with the rules, Deborah will be serving as the timer, and there'll be a red light.
No, green, yellow, and flashing yellow.
And flashing yellow, not flashing red. Okay,
There's no red tonight.
10 minutes. Wayne?
Ready?
Yep.
Oh, wait.
written over 100 years ago. It was written by Don Henley. It goes something like this. They're picking up the prisoners and put them in a pen. And all she wants to do is dance, dance. Rebels been rebels since I don't know when. All she wants to do is dance. Well, I got that wrong, actually. I looked up Henley of England, and I got Don Henley of the Eagles. So that's Don Henley. William Ernest Henley is the poet from England. William endured an impoverished childhood, then later contracted tuberculosis, and had a leg amputated. His famous poem, Invictus, finishes with this. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Lofty language. Okay, so we're here to learn if that is true. Are we the masters of our fate, the captains of our soul? Let's mix in a Bible verse right now. Isaiah 45:17. I form the light and create darkness. I bring prosperity and create disaster. I, the Lord, do all these things. God just may be tweaking the controls. In 2012, a Tempe, Arizona businessman had issues. One of these issues was a brain tumor. He had earlier been reported to have been speaking gibberish. Distraught, 47-year-old James Butwin killed his wife and 3 children. Melissa, 16, Daniel 14, and Matthew 7. Almost sounds like Bible passages. Daniel 14 and Matthew 7. The brain tumor may have led him to commit the murders. Probably no one will argue over forgiving a criminal if the crime was caused because of a brain tumor. But every criminal's brain is shaped by trillions of events, which also are not under his control. So this requires some thought. I'll paraphrase Richard Dawkins. We can do no more than to dance to the music of our DNA. Some of us believe that our actions result exclusively from cause and effect, that free will is an illusion. Others may believe that we truly make free will choices. We'll hear various opinions. Statistically, right now, we can say that at least a few children are being raped. It happens. So, to whom has God supposedly given free will? Not the children. It appears that rapists have free will. But should they? God doesn't seem to stop rapists. One explanation for that is it's all part of God's plan. Seriously, some think that God's plan includes that children get raped, or at least he knowingly allows it because of his need for free will. Whose plan works best in a circumstance like that? Do you think it's the Yahweh plan? Or do you think the child would prefer Batman? Pow! If God were to intervene as the child screams out right now, just whose free will would be affected? The rapist, right? And why would it be bad if a rapist's free will were curtailed? Because it's God's plan. You decide what's right for yourself. I have my opinion. So, God may have granted us free will. If he did, he really set things up for us. God gave us what is estimated to be 12,000 human diseases and sent us on our way with free will. Or do you suppose those 12,000 human diseases have come our way via evolution? According to the Bible, God didn't always have a hands-off approach. We're told that thousands of years ago, God was performing all manner of miracles. Don't you imagine that in those circumstances, someone's free will was violated? Time travel with me back to Egypt. Pharaoh, Moses bringing plagues from God. And there was death. There was destruction. But a funny thing there, at least 8 times in the book of Exodus, the Bible tells us that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Why would he harden his heart? To prove that he was the Lord. And so Pharaoh's free will, I'm not sure how Pharaoh had free will with his heart being hardened. He could have had it softened, and that would have ended the whole thing. The Israelites would have been able to have left. Oh, and by the way, did you know that during that episode, God killed some of the same animals 3 times? Exodus 9:6, God kills all of Egypt's animals. Exodus 9:25, God re-kills some of Egypt's animals. He smites them with hail. Exodus 12:29, God again kills all the firstborn of Egypt's animals. All this because he hardened Pharaoh's heart? That's quite the story. And don't forget Jesus. He supposedly healed blind people, got money from a fish's mouth, turned water into wine, and sent pigs over a cliff. All of those things proving that he was God. So free will was not so crucial for God then, but it supposedly is now. And while we're at it, notice this. Jesus did not demonstrate that he was God by giving us even a clue about germ theory. We had to figure that out for ourselves over millennia. In fact, Jesus and his disciples were criticized for not having been diligent hand washers. Yeah, think about this. We got a good lesson about washing the disciples' stinking feet, but we didn't get a lesson about washing hands as related to food preparation. Maybe the proving of Godship was so necessary that free will had to be suspended in some moments. But if so, then why not really prove it? Showing that you're God by condemning slavery. In case you miss my sentiments, I'm truly disappointed if a real God the Father and a real Lord Jesus did not teach us about germ theory or that slavery was wrong. Well, we're on a complex subject tonight. Our bodies are handling functions which we're not aware of. You are made up of approximately 10 trillion cells, each of them doing something. In addition to that, you carry with you 100 trillion bacteria. Each bacterium is doing something as well. Many Christians believe in predestination, which is supposedly God's plan that some souls are foreordained for salvation, but some are not. Those not predestined are, I guess, out of luck. The discussion has gone on for millennia. Predestination or election, how about that? This parallels the philosophical discussion of determination versus free will. Predestination is a New Testament teaching. A couple of the predestination Bible verses are Ephesians 1:5. He predestined us to adoption as sons through Jesus Christ himself. Ephesians 1:11. We have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to his purpose. If you want a label, you can say that it is Calvinists who believe that God predestined only some to be saved. Let's remember as well that if someone is unlucky enough to have the ingredients of a sociopath, that guy's soul may be in for a rough time of it as well. The very next thought that you have surfaces from trillions of prior causes. You didn't choose your life. Your parents, Which one of the roughly 60 million sperm present during that amorous event would father your DNA? You didn't choose your city, your country, or even the century of your birth, or childhood accidents, or nutrition, or diseases. Having said that, we have to be realistic. To be functional, we have to hold each other accountable, even if it seems that we weren't dealt the best hand.
You're at 10 minutes.
Huh?
You're at 10:30.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're holding. Okay, thank you so much.
Jared, I think you're up.
Oh, I thought it was
No,
20
no.
for them.
It'll go to this side to do both of your arguments, and then first part is ended by their chance.
Okay. Go.
Does God have free will? Can God choose evil? Do human beings have free will? The simple response is yes, no, yes. But things are seldom simple. Does God have free will? Human reasoning divides time into past, present, and future. Now, the scriptures reveal that God is omniscient. The argument against free will is that a being that knows all things concerning the future is certain of what will transpire, therefore must act in accordance to what is known, which ultimately negates free will. It's the ability to choose something else. Now, this idea hinges on a particular understanding of what the future is. The future, by definition, is what will happen in the time after right now. Right now. Is the future static? Is it dynamic? Is the future fixed? Is the future open? Do such things as a future even really exist? Now, memory informs us that the past happened. The past is fixed. What has happened has happened, even if our perception of what happened may change. If we think the future as we conceive of the past, then like the past, the future is fixed, and there can be no free will. But if we conceive of the future as open, then as personal relational beings, we can and do exercise libertarian free will, and the choices made in the now have a real effect upon the future that is created. With an open future, omniscience, all-knowingness, is understood as God knowing all real possibilities. God creates the parameters of all possibilities, and given these parameters, is free to act in relation to the uncoerced choices of individuals. Let me try to illustrate it this way. A world-class chess master may announce that she will checkmate you in not more than 13 moves. She's not certain what moves you're going to make, but she is certain that based on her superior ability to think through the possibilities, she sees that the game is already settled. And in not more than 13 moves, you find that you've lost. God's omniscience enables an awareness of all the possible choices a person can make, and therefore, while he is not surprised, there is a great risk, for the individual action can delay or even hinder the inevitable checkmate that God has in store. Well, can God choose evil? Logic seems to dictate that if I endow a being with free will, then that being has the freedom to choose evil as well as good. Well, what is evil? How is evil to be defined? Now, from a sociological perspective, an action is judged morally wrong or evil when the action deviates from the agreed cultural norms of a society. So in the absence of an objective moral code, of conduct. Right or wrong is determined by the individual. See, one man's terrorist is another man's patriot. Evil is in the eye of the beholder. Now, if in my annual checkup the doctor discovers I have cancer, and in consultation with my surgeon she suggests a course of action in which she's going to cut out the metastasized cancer cells but leave the precancerous cells basically in place until such a time as they become invasive. Now, she knows that the precancerous cells presently are not creating any danger to the health of my body. Now, she knows that later on they probably will, but right now they're not causing a problem, so she'll leave them in place. Would my surgeon's plan be an evil plan or a good plan? Now, in the Bible, we have many instances in which God appears that God has chosen evil, as Wayne pointed some of those out for us. Definitely by the standards of the day. Let me point one out to you. It's in 1 Samuel 15, and here we read this. Thus says the Lord of hosts, that would be Yahweh, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did in opposing the Israelites when they came out of Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both men and women, children and infant, oxen, sheep, camel, and donkey. Certainly in our modern civilized culture, we would declare the killing of children and infants as morally wrong. Such action would be condemned as evil. Yet when we put such commands as these in the context of the biblical narrative, the extension of the Amalekite society differs little from my request that my surgeon remove both the metastasized and the precancerous cells from my body. You see, when reading the Bible, it's important to keep in mind that there are three levels of narrative at work throughout the Scripture. There's the meta-narrative. This is the big story of God's intent for his creation to enjoy fellowship with him. There's in the meta-narrative is that big story. Then there's a secondary plot that's going on, a secondary story about God redeeming a people for his own. And then finally, after this secondary plot comes the hundreds of individual narratives that make up a majority of the stories that we have in the Bible. So when one interprets the Scripture, one must consider how an individual narrative fits into the story of God redeeming his people, and ultimately to be understood in the light of the meta-narrative of God's ultimate aim. God commands the utter destruction of the Amalekite people. Now, this is a level 1 individual narrative, and it sounds like evil, especially from the perspective of the Amalekites. But then we've got to ask, how does this command fit into the level 2 narrative of God's chosen people? Is it possible that given the general culture of lex talionis, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that these that we would deem innocents will grow up and seek revenge, threatening God's chosen people? The precancerous cells will metastasize and threaten the health of the body? God's goal of preserving a people requires that the threat of the Amalekites that they represent, it must be eliminated. So, from this perspective, God's action is good. See, our judgments of what is morally wrong are based on our perspective. From the perspective of the Amalekites, God can choose evil. But from the perspective of the Israelites, God doesn't choose evil. Ultimately, the question, can God choose evil? It can't be answered unless the question is asked in a specific context and with a full understanding of the circumstances involved. Judging an action of God as morally reprehensible is to assume that God is acting in discontinuity with the Bible's stated objective of redemption. What we deem as evil behavior may basically be the result of not having all the facts. Now, faith's interpretation of the revelation of God through the life of Jesus Christ is that God is opposed from evil. And believing that God is opposed from evil, he would not choose to act in a manner that deviates from the meta-narrative of the biblical story. Yet ultimately, from our limited perspective, it's impossible to objectively judge if God's actions are good or evil. Faith subjectively assumes that God's revealed to us through Jesus of Nazareth desires what is good, which brings me to the last 45 seconds. If you adopt a determinist outlook on reality, does man have free will? No. Determinism is the philosophical position that for every event there exists a cause. Let me jump a little bit ahead. Basically, X determines Y. A cause determines an effect. But in physics, quantum mechanics has proved that X does not have to necessitate Y. The conclusion drawn from that observation in physics is that the effect of a cause is futuristically unpredictable. That means there is a level of uncertainty. And if there's a level of uncertainty within the quantum realm, could there not be a level of uncertainty in the many things that Wayne pointed out that has already determined who we're going to be? My answer is that the wiggle room is where human beings create free choices that create the future that we live in. Thank you.
I know that sometime during this debate I'm going to fall off this ledge.
Don't do that.
I want to thank Bruce and the Atheists, the Skeptics, for these debates. Thanks for the memories. Thanks for the debates on the origin of the universe, the origin of life, the complexity of life, the efficacy of prayer, the religious beliefs of our founding fathers, the character of God, and now the free will of man. In every one of these debates, I've grown spiritually because I've learned things that I didn't really think about quite as deeply before. We had a debate, Deborah and I, on prayer. And I realized that there are certain things that God will always answer yes to. A prayer for salvation, a prayer for forgiveness, a prayer for wisdom. He who gives to all men liberally and upbraideth not. A prayer for, Lord, give me a character quality of reverence, of tolerance, of give me one of those 49 character qualities. And Lord, give me humility. And so it was an encouragement for me to pray. Now, with this debate on free will, all of a sudden I'm realizing that I have a tremendous amount of free will that I'm not using. There are so many things that I could be doing, knowing that I actually do have free will and I am not living up to what I can do. God has given us a tremendous amount of free space. There was a fella who wrote a book, and he was talking about free will, and he was a professor at Dallas Seminary, and there was a question that Adam had. God had told Adam, of all the trees of our garden you shall freely eat, only don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So Adam picked, I'm going to pick an apple tree, not the one. And so he told Eve, take a bunch of these apples and do something with it. And then Eve came back, what do you want? Apple strudel, apple pie, apple sauce? And so he had to ask God, what do you want? Do you want? And God said the same thing. Of all the trees of the garden you shall freely eat, only don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And in every case, a lot of people, a lot of friends of mine, godly men and women, are waiting for God to tell them what to do. And God has given us a freedom to serve him in so many ways. Hudson Taylor's little daughter, Gracie, she was 5 years old, and she had made for him a little thing out of cockle shells. And Hudson Taylor was trying to figure out, what is this thing that she has made me? And finally he figured it out. It was a ship to take him back to China. He kept that. She died that year. He kept that the rest of his life. God is so pleased with anything that we can do for him that he gives us the opportunity to be creative in serving him. He doesn't take that away from us. When doing the debates, we've covered so many different subjects. I want to touch on some of this because it fits into the framework with which I want to share with you. We talked about the origin of life, the origin of, well, where did the substance of the universe come from? And if we got matter, then how did we get life? And if we got life, how did we get order and complexity? And how are all these things explained? And so many times the person, the non-theist, will say, well, we don't have all the answers yet, but we're getting there. We're discovering new things. Eventually we'll figure it all out. And it sounds a little bit like reductionism. Reductionism is taking something like a typewriter, and I'm going to take all the pieces, and once I take it all apart, all of a sudden I can understand how it works. But understanding how it works doesn't tell me how it got there in the first place. And that's the problem. We discover how things work by observing the component parts. The light microscope revealed the relationship of chromosomes to cellular division. The electron microscopy allowed visualization of genes and even DNA molecules within the chromosomes. Chemical analysis and X-ray diffraction studies have revealed the specific structure of DNA, base pairing, and the roles of DNA, RNA, mRNA, nRNA, tRNA, and various enzymes in genetics and heredity. However, reductionism is only useful for explaining the operation of the machine, not its origin. As a book cannot be accounted for the knowledge of its constituent atoms, the ink, the cellulose, and the painting cannot be accounted for by its canvas and paint, so life cannot be accounted for by the enumeration of nucleotides and chemical laws governing the interactions. There is a biochemical bias. If DNA letters show preferences in the DNA chain and amino acids show preferences in the proteins, then all DNA would be the same and protein would be the same. But life is diverse. From where did the atoms get their inherent ability, the design to evolve? And assume we did get somehow managed to get a protein molecule to come and form through amino acids, which apparently would take 1 over 10 to the 89,190th power times 1 over 10 to the 78,436 power, the probability of forming 124 proteins and the probability of forming DNA. That would end up with 1 over 10 to the 167,626 power, assuming 1 million Earths around every star in the universe and having all of its oceans full of nucleotides linking to form DNAs every second for 10 billion years. But that doesn't explain, even if you had that, you could never form a membrane-encased, self-reproducing, self-repairing, metabolizing living cell. There's no evidence that any stable state exists between the formation of a protein and a living cell. Those are the things that we have to explain. We're talking about something here that is important, but we're not describing some of the details, and nobody within the non-theistic community has been able to explain to us how we got the eye with its 10 million photoreceptor cells. Each one can perform the equivalent of 500 nonlinear simultaneous differential equations 100 times a millisecond. And when you consider that there's 10 million of them interacting with each other in complex ways, it would take a Cray supercomputer over 100 years to simulate what takes place in the back of your eye many times every second. These are the things. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. It all points to an infinite creator. There's several testimonies that we have. First of all, his creation itself. Then we have the conscience in our hearts, the light that lighteth every man that comes into the world. Then we have the eternity in their hearts that Job talks about. Every one of us feels and understands this. And as I was looking at the theory behind this philosophy of, do we have a free will? And I'm starting to study Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris, and I'm reading back and forth their arguments. And I'm seeing, yes, there are two different kinds of free will. There's a kind of free will that's a actual free will, and then there is the experiential free will. We all experience what we do. Everything I do seems to have cause and effect. I can actually get in my car and drive home tonight. There are things that I can do, and it does affect everything else around me. I may not have control over the universe, but I can control my space in the universe. And the fact that we have something that is not observable, what they would call the total or absolute free will, I think that's imaginary. I don't think it exists. Just like the idea of coming around and explaining some of these things through reductionism, I don't see how you have any absolute cause to produce the effect. But you say you're going to find it. But science is supposed to be what we can see and observe. You can't see this absolute free will anywhere. But I can see my free will, the one that works, the one that every one of us And we've got, 7 billion people, each one of them can testify to the fact that yes, they do have free will. It's not something you can quantify and write on a piece of paper through, so many observed cases using mathematics that most people don't understand, but this is something that is intuitive and every person knows it. So we almost don't have to prove it. Their argument would be for the car, it's the foot on the gas pedal, and for the human, it's a combination of chemicals coming together in this brain based on the laws of physics. Either way, they aren't making free choices despite having different settings or capabilities. Taking input and formulating a complex response is not freedom. Plants do it, animals do it, computers do it. This is not the standard. And if it were, then most living things would qualify. It's just a question of degree. Picking from available options is illusory freedom because it ignores the fact that you were only presented a few choices and you weren't the one to choose them. This is true even without mentioning the uncomfortable bit that you're also not the one picking afterwards. So what I believe he should do, and this is the idea. Now this is Sam Harris's reflection on Daniel Dennett. He says what he should do is to acknowledge the difference between absolute and practical freedom and then clearly state that he supports the practical version and not the absolute. Their final conclusion after all of this is who cares about absolute freedom? Even if it exists, we can't do anything about it, so let's just deal in the practical. It's the end of the argument, really. And so I think that's where we're at. I wanted to share a little more, but my time is up, so I will let you retire.
It's kind of interesting that he started with something about the Garden of Eden and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. I hope everybody would rather partake of the knowledge of good and evil rather than of ignorance. Because with the knowledge of good and evil, we can certainly know that to kill all the young people just because they're descendants of our enemy is wrong. If we can know that, then we can exercise free will. Cogito ergo sum. So says Rene Descartes, I am thinking, therefore I exist. There is both individual agency and group agency. A group may unite its members with shared principles and common goals. The members and leaders may all be replaced while the principles and goals remain intact. The group itself may appear to have agency, but it is only the members that can achieve its goals and maintain its principles. Karl Marx argued that people are controlled by the ideologies of the bourgeois. I say influenced but not controlled. To have free will, one must have desires and ambitions as well as the capacity to act towards achieving them. Without that capacity, desires and ambitions are no more than dreams. I assert, therefore, we are not born with free will. Nevertheless, the beginning of its development occurs as soon as the baby begins to suckle. That development advances as the individual's capacity develops for movement and communication. That is, free will is exercised more as the child increases in strength, coordination, and communicates with more sophisticated body language, facial expressions, and language acquisition. The free will at this stage, and that of non-human animals, is largely, if not completely, deterministic. I do not mean destiny or foreordination, but causal determination. For some, the development of free will may not continue beyond causal determination. If it does continue, for whom and to what? To indeterministic free will, for those who make a choice to act in a way that is contrary to the way they had consistently acted in similar circumstances previously. The individual makes new synaptic connections in the brain to confront the possibilities and may choose, for example, 1. The new attitude towards an individual group, merciful and benevolent, apathetic, or ruthless and exploitive. Or 2, an educational direction. One may choose either the arts or the sciences. For the arts, they may choose a path of music or painting and sculpture, theater, or literature. In the sciences, you may choose engineering or mathematics, biology or chemistry. After a choice is made, in either case, the individual may reconsider, given new experiences acquired, knowledge, and unexpected opportunities. Synaptic plasticity refers to the way the brain of an individual changes over time. These are not genetic changes, but structural, due to the thought choices that we make. What are thought choices, and where do thoughts originate? We don't control where thoughts come from, and I won't guess where that might be. I'm asserting that what we control is what thoughts we entertain. We choose whether to dwell on certain thoughts or cast them out of our minds. By focusing on a certain field of thought, we allow thoughts within that field to enter our minds from wherever they may come. We disregard extraneous thoughts to develop further that which is our focus. Brainstorming is an example of this thought focus, and so is an attempt to retrieve some memory. I'm sure a lot of you have had something on the just that you knew it was back there somewhere, you just couldn't quite bring it to the front. So we know it's somewhere in our head, but we don't know how to access it. Sometimes we can feel it trying to work its way to the surface, but it's just not quite there. Finally, we content ourselves to let our unconscious work on the problem, and we may access that information seconds later, days later, or not at all. And sometimes a friend of ours will say, "Oh yeah, I know it was such and such," and then, "Yep, that was it." And we know immediately that that was the thought that we were trying to retrieve, or the memory. These don't demonstrate free will, but plasticity. When we do these things effectively, our brains make new connections, and so too when we attempt to resolve a conflict in our own behavior or attitudes. Indeterministic free will is not at play continuously. It doesn't need to be. Except in these rare cases that indeterministic free will become a factor, deterministic free will is the guiding force in our lives. Personally, I reject libertarianistic free will because I see it as more capricious than can be justifiable. Recognition of deterministic free will is an acknowledgement of personal volition and responsibility, as well as the cause-effect relationships that drive our decisions, attitudes, and actions. It is the link between the indeterministic and the deterministic that makes us accountable and not just responsible. That is, we have occasional indeterministic choices that thereafter affect our deterministic choices. We have countless opportunities as maturing children to learn appropriate behaviors, and they continue well into adulthood. Many children, however, are subject to abuse or neglect, leading to negative behaviors to their detriment. They too have indeterministic choices, particularly when outside the abusive environment, if they can leave it. I repeat, if they can leave that environment. They will need a lot of help to see there are in fact better ways of behaving. With that help, their indeterministic choices will change them. A fictional case in point is Les Miserables. Eugene Francois Vidocq being the historical person whom the character Jean Valjean was based. I bring this up because of its direct relevance to indeterministic free will and the problems of the dispossessed. If a person has been so abused as a child and unable to escape the oppressive environment that the damage is overwhelming, can we say the victim has meaningful indeterministic choices? Probably not. Can we hold such a person responsible and accountable? We are each responsible for what we do and what we don't do. A person such as that, however, is not accountable. Responsible, yes. Accountable, no. We as a society have failed to protect too many abused and neglected children. It would be an unreasonable expectation that their behavior would be the same as that of an individual raised in a home with love, nurture, and opportunity. To expect that of them, we must first pay the debt of what they have been deprived. Thus far, our payments have been delinquent and insufficient. Instead, we have declared bankruptcy and left these victims to rot in prison. I agree with Daniel Dennett that irreducible randomness is not needed for human freedom. Determinism is defined: every event is causally necessitated by antecedent events. That is, the facts of the past in conjunction with the laws of nature and tell every truth about the future. I can't agree with such a strict definition of determinism. If that definition is the accepted one, I must reject it completely, because it disregards probabilities and statistical relevance. I agree that for something to be an effect, it must have one or more causes. I don't agree that a particular effect is necessarily inevitable, but that the cause or set of causes may lead to alternative effects. Incidentally, I don't claim there is no uncaused cause. I don't say that there is. I'm just saying that I don't claim that there isn't. Even though I assert that some probabilities rather than only certainties are at play in the unfolding of the physical universe we live in, I don't think it's relevant to the question of free will. If it were, and excluding determinism, our choices would be subject to agents of chance rather than only to prior external causes, and would still leave agency outside the individual. Furthermore, I assert that our actions are almost always the result of decisions made long before we are in a situation to make those decisions and to act on them. These decisions may be made subconsciously or consciously, but the actions are so spontaneous or immediate that it should be clear that the decision long preceded the action. Other times we may have not previously contemplated such a situation or the appropriate response to it. We then organize the information, consider the alternatives, and finally act or don't act. All in a short time period. We may yet reconsider our response later on. The botanist Robert Brown noticed, I guess I better cut this short. Let me just say that there are a lot of things to consider in determinism and indeterminism, and I hope to learn more from the other gentlemen here as we proceed. Thank you.
All right. Bruce mentioned to me that one of the things that we didn't account for in our time was for some discussion between the both sides for each other. So we would like to set aside a little bit of time now, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, for both members on each side to kind of compare notes. And after that, then we will provide opportunity for some actual dialogue. Wayne, Jared, does that work with you guys? Sure. So excellent job for both sides. Is that okay in that time? So we'll take a couple of minutes, let them kind of identify those things that they'd like to get
Dave?
clarification on.
Why don't we just take a couple minute break?
Okay, let's do that. Let's say 3 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, the bathroom's just out here to the right, and then to the left.
Yes. I could probably email it to you.
ready to get this dialogue started. And also want to remind you that as you hear the discussion among the panelists, we're going to have some time set aside for you as audience to participate, to be able to ask some questions as well. In the past, we've had so many people standing in line to wait that we really didn't offer much opportunity for a meaningful dialogue, but because the size of the group tonight, we're going to make sure that we give more opportunity for questioning and answering. Questioning again. I've asked this side if they'd like to go first. They offered it to you. So we're going to go ahead and start a dialogue of about 5 minutes, back and forth on the points that have been made. The first half of the debate. So Christians go first.
Well, I would like to respond to something that was mentioned, and then I'll ask a question. The first has to do with the germ theory that was not mentioned, and yet Dr. Macmillan wrote a book called None of These Diseases, and he went through the Old Testament. He showed what happened in Italy when they were actually going, and the doctors were seeing all the newborns dying, and they realized that if they handled a dead person, they were supposed to go through a ceremonial washing. When they began to practice that, all of a sudden the babies were no longer dying because they had a routine to go to the morgue first and then go to the where babies are born. Anyway, they had this. The other problem was that they didn't understand quarantine. And once the bubonic plague hit, there was another plague in England. When they went back to the Old Testament, they looked how the concept of quarantine, the plague was broken. I think within the scriptures, God has given us things that there was no way anybody would have known this, except he didn't talk about germs directly, but he showed how to avoid these things, what they were supposed to do when they, with their excrement and various other things. There was these laws, these dietary laws. In fact, the Jews were blamed in Europe when these plagues occurred because they were not suffering like the rest of the people because they were following the Old Testament laws. So I think God did write that into the scriptures. That's just a comment, but
Okay, that's not accounting for Jesus and his disciples being very poor hand washers according to Jewish tradition, right?
well, he did not come to get rid of the law, but to fulfill it. So apparently he did follow the law there. There was ceremonial law, there was the moral law, there was the actual, he was fulfilling this law, and I imagine that they did do these things. I don't know that there's a lot of description in their hand washing activities, but I think God, and whenever you're writing history, I could write a history book and just about what any one of us did from this morning, and it would cover bigger than the Encyclopedia Britannica if I talked about every cell in your body, what it was doing at a particular time. So it has to be selective. And there was a message that God was trying to make through in the New Testament, through the message of Christ. And it was a message that all of us need to know as to, the fact that there is a God and he loves us and he wants us to be with him, and he's provided a sacrifice to pay for our sins.
See, to me, I see an issue there in that God, all-powerful God, all-knowing God, all-present God, somehow has failed to get the message to us about germ theory until we stumbled across it, what are we, 100, 200,000 years into humanity before we...
Listerine was actually a Christian, and he discovered, that's where we get their Lister, Joseph Lister. In fact, they found that almost every founder of every science was a Christian, a Bible-believing Christian. Every field of science. Henry Morris goes through this in detail and describes. I think God blessed them because they're seeking him with wisdom and knowledge and understanding. And I don't think there's, not that many years. I believe that the universe itself is only about 6,000 years old. So.
Okay, so then it was only 5,800 years before we learned about germ theory.
Excuse me. Wayne, I'm just having a hard time seeing the connection between your statement, which I think is very accurate, by the way, about germ theory and free will. Could you tie that in together for me?
Maybe I'm just getting something off my chest, huh? that could be. But germ theory well, if God created us and created everything, there's nothing been created that God didn't create, right? There's nothing that God didn't create.
I wouldn't agree with that.
Okay, I can look up some verses. What's the point?
I'll disagree with the
Oh,
verse.
Could
okay.
you use the microphone, please?
Oh, certainly.
Got a trade back for me.
Sure, sorry.
You probably quote from Colossians 1.
Okay, however, what I'm saying is God is tweaking the controls, I mentioned that earlier,
Mhm.
by dumping all these diseases on us, and then we supposedly have free will, but we have to contend with all these things that God has thrown our way, and somehow we're saying that this is legitimate free will, and I'm thinking it's compromised because of the conditions that God has given to us.
Yeah, I think if you were trapped in that thought that everything that is, its causal relationship goes right, traced back to God, then I could understand perfectly why you are saying what you're saying.
Okay, but mostly what I was saying was just in rebuttal of Dave's remarks there.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
Well, in that
I
case,
started it, so
put it over here.
it's my fault. Do you have some questions for us?
Mike, when you spoke of the 1 Samuel 15, the killing of the Amalekites,
yeah.
total destruction, that was pretty bad.
Oh, there's lots of bad things.
Wasn't quite as bad as this, though. Deuteronomy 21, 10 through 13, there was kind of the same destruction there, except God authorized the wartime keeping of attractive enemy
Oh, yeah.
women.
Yeah, good-looking women instead of the ugly ones.
Yeah. So
So what's
This-
wrong with that?
I personally thought it was a good idea.
so
That demonstrates free will, right?
yeah. So
Someone had to choose. Here, go ahead. Respond.
anyway, that's
My
to me,
res-
that's God tweaking the free will controls again.
My response to that is basically what happened was that the pagan approach was that they would rape all the women. In this case, that God was showing that if you want to, if you see one that you desire, you can take her for a wife, your only wife. You have to keep her for 30 days. She is, and you have to make that decision. And so it's a much more, it's a much better way to do things than raping all of the women.
A 30-day free trial, though. Is that-
Well, of having her as your wife.
Yeah.
No, I think that there are parameters which are created, and within those parameters there's a host of possibilities such that any single cause does not necessitate an effect, the same effect. I think if you look at things from maybe an aesthetic type of position, the aesthetic aim of a artist may produce a painting. And when we look at that painting, we can retroactively make everything we see intelligible because we can trace it back to the artistic aim of the painter. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. But given the artistic aim of the painter that has produced this product doesn't necessitate that the artist couldn't have done something slightly different and still fulfilled their artistic intent. So the cause resulted in a different painting. Right? Okay, so that's when I think a lot of times when I talk about wiggle room, that I agree with you. There's a lot of things that are determined. Oh my goodness, you had no choice who your parents were, like Jared mentioned, where we were born, your intelligence, all those types of things were determined for you. In fact, I read a study where it said like about scientists say like 93% of human behavior is predictable. 93% is determined. You're going, I mean, we know what you're going to do. But that leaves that 7% of unpredictability. And if it's unpredictable, if there's that wiggle room, then that undermines the whole concept of determinism.
If the wiggle room exists.
If the wiggle room exists, and I'm only saying it's just a small spot. It's not a lot of room there, but there is a place where human behavior is unpredictable. And that is the place of free will.
So if we go and strangle the snot of all the atheists that we run into, that was already predetermined?
Guess so.
Good comment.
Wow, I think on that note, we're going to open it up to questions from you. When you step up to the microphone, please address to somebody in particular, or at least let people know, to whom that question you'd like to have answered. We're going to be very flexible in the amount of time that we allot for this.
Depending on how the conversation is going, I think that we can make this a conversation with all the panelists on stage. Just try to make your comments in the question form, or you can make it in comment form. Just make sure to direct it to whoever you like. We're ready?
All right.
Okay, got one for Wayne. Do you wash your hands before you eat every time?
Probably not every time. No.
Okay,
No.
thank you.
That was easy. Dr. Westfall.
Okay, I have a comment and a question each side. Is that permissible or
A
not?
little closer. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. A brief comment about the hygiene aspect.
Okay.
In Matthew.
Go a little closer,
Okay.
right up to the mic.
Okay, in Matthew 15, Jesus was merely trying to make the point about what defiles a person. He wasn't trying to abrogate hygiene in the process.
Okay. But still, we have a colossal God the Father failure and Jesus failure by letting mankind struggle with this. Babies have died in the mother's arms. Your husbands and wives have died. And throughout centuries and centuries, until the human stepped in and finally learned what was going on. So that's a colossal failure. That's really my point.
I want to ask one question to this side, if I may. Rather than free will, some people have said we're really a slave to sin or a slave to righteousness. How would you respond?
I think you have a myriad of possibilities, and you choose to actualize any given possibility within the parameters that you have. And so you ultimately choose whether you're going to go down a path that the Bible would consider sin, which I simply define as any behavior that deters or damages or destroys a right relationship, or a path of righteousness, which I would define as anything that's in harmony with its intent. So I think not so much being enslaved to one or the other, but that you do actually have a choice of one or the other.
Well, we do have a tendency to develop habits, and those sinful habits, or whatever good habits, either one, do have a tendency to monitor our behavior. A person who is involved in pornography pornography eventually becomes addicted to pornography. A person who gets involved in drugs many times gets addicted to drugs or alcohol or whatever. So he becomes, in a sense, a slave to that. Now, it doesn't mean that he can't get free, but it's more difficult once a person has maintained a habit in a particular area. So the idea is we have the freedom to pray that God will deliver us from any one of these things, to give us the freedom. And I know so many people who have gotten free from all kinds of addictions simply because they prayed and asked God to help them.
And then the question I was going to ask on this side, if you had your wish to be granted, how much evil that exists currently would you expunge?
You want to answer?
I don't believe there is such a thing as evil. I think there's a social cowardice, there's social bankruptcy, there's all sorts of social problems, but evil I don't agree with.
Okay, would you expunge all of that then?
Well, that depends on the society. It's relative. So what I would do is I would make changes to society, not expunge all evil.
Jared's a deeper thinker than I am. Yes, I would expunge all evil.
Then I would have asked you in return, would you have survived the purging?
Good point. No, no.
I listened for definitions of free will and determinism. Mike gave a good one for determinism. For every event, there exists a cause. And Jared gave another good one for determinism. All events are the result of antecedent events. I heard no definition of free will, except that Jared made a distinction between indeterministic free will and deterministic free will. Indeterministic free will, I think we can all intuitively understand. But for deterministic free will, you said the idea that you are responsible for what you do, but what you do is determined. My question is, if what you do is determined, why is that which determined it not responsible for it?
Because we are still agents.
Thank you.
Still what? Agents. Agents?
Carrier out of whatever the cause was.
Pastor Mike, this one's for you. Do you ever remember Jesus having to heal any of his disciples because they got sick because they didn't wash their hands?
No.
Okay. Over here, you were talking about how God doesn't give us everything. And it immediately brought children to my mind. And we don't protect them from everything because the struggle makes them stronger, makes them grow up. But what my question really is here is, have either of you read Richard Warren Brand's Tortured for Christ? Okay, I recommend that book. I was thinking, if I was in his situation where I was tortured every day and there was no way out, every day you could expect to be tortured, would I choose, I have a free will, I can choose to go with God who's there with me every second of the day, gives me the strength to get through it, and will never leave me or forsake me, or I could choose to believe there's no God and have no help, and I wonder what would happen to my mind. So if you were in a situation like that, taking away all this extraneous stuff, all the society, there are bad guys out there, maybe not evil, but there's bad society. What would you choose?
I'm all for you taking whatever comfort from you can, whether it's from something I believe in or not. So if believing in God gives you comfort in a bad situation like that, keep on believing. It's not going to give me any comfort, though. But you make the choice that works for you.
Well, I hope you never find out which one you choose.
It wouldn't do me any good to believe in something like that.
Yeah, if you don't believe in God. I agree.
Well, I don't that mindset that God does not exist, then believing in God still isn't going to provide any comfort for me. If it does for you, that's fine.
Well, if you ever get in that situation, he
Why-
says, if you seek
That's
him.
a hypothetical.
Right, right, exactly. I'm just putting it in the back of your mind.
You already said it.
I'd like to talk with you later, ma'am, about your idea. Okay, hi. Having fun, guys?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
You had to think about it?
I just wanted to make sure I understood the question.
I think that your free will is actually an illusion,
Yes,
very
of course it
strong
is.
one. But I wanted to talk about religious determinism, especially to Mike. Mike, you mentioned the chess game, about God kind of knowing 13 steps ahead.
Yeah.
Let's say God knows where you're going to be in that 1 hour of those 13 steps or 10 minutes of those 13 steps. Let's just bring it back to his omnisciency. Do you believe that God is omniscient?
Yes, but I defined it a little bit differently. Wayne brought out an excellent point when he was talking about different thoughts within Christianity, that there are actually, it's not just a homogeneous type of philosophical thought or religious belief, but there's actually a lot of variability within Christian thought. Wayne mentioned about determinism, about an omniscient God predetermining all things, quoted a scripture used in a theological system created by a man called John Calvin that would predetermine everything. And if that's the case, then there's no such thing as free will, and I would agree that it's totally illusionary. But my particular stance on omniscience is that there's no future to know.
There's no future, but
There is no future to know.
But God says that He knows the future. The definition of God, He knows the past, present, and future. Maybe for you, but you have to admit, if God's omniscient, He knows everything in the future.
Well, not if there's no future to know.
But there is a future to know.
How do you know?
Because I experience it personally among everybody else. I think it's pretty consensus that there is a future. Unless there's an atom bomb going to be going off next door, I don't think there's going to be a future. And even after the atom bomb goes off, there's going to be a future. I don't understand where you're going with this when you're saying there is no future. Of course there's a future.
No, the reality that we live in is in the now.
Of course, but we
Right.
accept that the future will be right after the now.
Because of sequence, which is a faith statement.
No, it's a personal experience statement. Everybody of
It's
no
a faith statement.
Of no faith and faith have personal experience of the future.
No, you don't.
Expectations of the future. That's
There
what
you
we
go.
know. Okay.
You don't have an experience of the future.
Okay,
You have an expectation of it, which
We don't know the future, that's correct. But
That
I'm
is
talking
correct.
about this God. If God's omniscient, among the Christian theology, they say He knows the past, He knows where we're going to be, just like the chess game you were mentioning. So
you know, what I said is that God didn't know the moves that we would take, but the
but
ultimate
He knows
aim.
that's right. Okay, that's what I want to
Ultimate
get to.
aim.
That's what I
Okay.
get to. Okay, so let's put it this way: that you think that God knows, let's say, where you're going to be in a year.
No,
He doesn't.
no.
Even though He knows all the steps possible, millions of different
He knows that
possibilities.
there's a possibility where I'll be in a year, but does not know where I will
Well,
be.
that doesn't define. That's opposite of omnisciency. If God doesn't know where you're going to be in a year, He's not omniscient.
No, exactly not. He knows all the possibilities where I'll be, but he doesn't know the choice I'll make.
That's right, but He knows where you're going to be in a particular time.
No, he knows the possibility of where I possibly could be in that year time, but he does not know the choices I'll make that might ultimately actualize that reality.
So He knows where you're going to be at a certain time, but He doesn't. He
No,
gives you
he
the
does
free
not.
will.
He knows the possibility of all the possibilities of the free choices that I could make that could possibly place me somewhere.
So you're saying God is not omniscient in this respect, that He does not know the future. One of the mainstays of Christian theology is that He knows the future.
No, it's not. Actually, if you understand Christian theology correctly, at least from my perspective, what you're saying is that you have said that there has to be a timeline.
No, I said He knows the future.
Well, that would beg the question that there has to be a
And you're
timeline.
saying
if it's
He doesn't
knowable.
know the future. So
I'm saying there's no timeline there of the future. All we have is artistic intent, in a sense.
there's no. We all expect there to be a timeline. We don't know what it is. But we
Agreed.
know
Then
that
why
the
would you
time
assume
will-
that God knows by saying?
Because it's the Christian belief. I don't accept it because I don't believe in a God. I'm asking you as a theologian.
I just told you.
That
I
you-
told you that in my view,
In your view, God does not know
Omniscience.
the future.
because there's no future to know.
Okay, I'm going to ask Dave that. Dave, you might have a different opinion.
He does.
Switch that microphone over. Do you think that God knows the future?
In Isaiah 42:9 and 46:9, it says very clearly that God does know the future. Behold, the former things are come to pass, and the new things I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. And then in Isaiah 46:9, it says, remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is none else. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, from ancient times, the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand.
Do you find it interesting, Dave and Mike, that here you both theologians, probably immersed in the Christian theology quite heavily. Dave, I know you're very astute, you study, and I know Mike probably has a very good idea of what he's talking about since he's the head of this church, and both of you disagree on God's omnisciency.
Well,
Do you think that that's kind of okay? I mean, really, if you disagree, and maybe other people will disagree on both of you, do you think that that's kind of a disgrace for a theology to have so many different opinions on a particular description of God?
Well, I think what's happened, and this is my own opinion, but I believe that what I was going to give a little in my closing statement, describe a little bit of what Calvinism is all about, because you've got really, I think, open theism, which is what Mike holds to in a sort of a moderate way, is that it's a reaction to this extreme Calvinism, this absolute determinism. I preached in a Calvinist church. I think I got 7 sermons in before they realized I wasn't a Calvinist. I was preaching on prayer, and I think they finally realized this guy actually believes in prayer.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Calvinists don't believe in prayer, correct?
well, they believe that prayer, they're total determinists, and most people don't realize that. That a Calvinist is a determinist. He believes that everything has been predetermined before the foundation of the world, and the problem that they have is they don't have an assurance of salvation because it was done in the
I'm
secret
gonna go
counsels
back
of
to
God
my-
before the foundation
I'm
of the
gonna
world.
go back to my original argument with Mike then, because I haven't presented it yet. No, Dave, stay on. I'm talking to Dave now. Okay, so let's say I talk with Christians a lot, of course, with our outreach programs, and I say to them, do you know where God places you in a year, both physically, mentally, psychologically, everything, right? And they say yes, he's omniscient, he knows. And then I still say, do you still have free will?
And then they'll answer yes.
Yes, they will.
Which is, what did you call it? Capricious. Jared's called it capricious, and he's absolutely right. If everything is determined by an all-knowing God who knows everything you're going to do ahead of time, there can be no free will. It doesn't make any sense.
That's correct. You're perfectly right, and that's my point. My point is that, suppose that I ask that Christian, do you know where God is going to be in a month? How about a day? How about a second? How about, before you even think of a thought, he knows
Okay,
what you're going to think. Therefore, there is no free will. So,
No.
are you...
I disagree with that totally. What we're talking about is middle knowledge. And the concept is that you are looking at a parade. You're looking through the picket fence, and you see one float go by at a time. God is not part of the space-time mass continuum. By definition, he created the space-time mass continuum. He could not be part of it. He's up above the parade. He sees the end from the beginning. That's exactly what the Bible teaches. He doesn't necessarily have to cause it to see it.
He doesn't have to cause it to see it.
Right.
But he knows what's going to be seen, correct?
Well, he knows it
I'm
because
kinda
he
confused.
exists.
You're saying that God doesn't cause things? You're saying there must be free will for him to see something even though he knows exactly what you're going to think before you even think it?
You got to place him outside of time. He's in the present, he's in the future, he's in the past. Omnipresent. That's the nature of God.
That's correct.
He is
but
outside the space-time mass
What we're
continuum.
talking about is if there is a God, he knows the future.
Well, if
He knows every
think,
part of the future.
think about it for a minute, Bruce. Think. He doesn't have to cause it just to know that it happened. It could have happened. See,